Okay, the webinar is now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of the Lunchroom. My name is Sarah Schofield-Mansford. I take she series pronouns. I'm the Assistant Director of Special Events and Partnerships at the ART. I'm a white woman with dark brown hair pulled back in a bun. I'm wearing a sort of pinky red button down. I'm sitting in a swivelly computer chair in my office, which has yellow painted walls and a few things propped up against the wall since I'm still not done unpacking from a recent move, to give you some idea of my current setting. Hi, Mark.
Hi, that's been like a good, recurring theme for us in the lunchroom is like the status of your move.
Yeah, it's been quite the process.
People, it's a good B plot from our conversations. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Lunsford. I'm the artistic producer at the ART. I take the he series pronouns. I'm a white man with a brown beard, brown hair, and I'm wearing a gray polo and sort of a maroon jacket. Sitting on the set of the lunchroom, which happens to be my living room, with a recliner over my right shoulder and a little potted plant and a little white pot over my left shoulder.
It's a cute plant.
It's a cute plant. It's from Emily Wilson.
Oh, wonderful. We love that.
Colleague, Emily Wilson. Yes. She'll be thrilled that she just got a lunchroom shout out, I'm sure.
Yeah, she's our set dresser now, so.
she is, a new title. Also want to acknowledge that the land where the Loeb and Oberon sit of the ART's performance venues is the traditional and unceded territory of the Massachusetts people, and in what is now known as Harvard Square. So we have captions available today as well, as we have been bringing to you. Our dear friend Lisa, who's off camera, is helping us out with the captions today. So thank you so much, Lisa, for your assistance. It's open captioning live is a tricky job.
Sure is. I did it one week. It was very difficult. To anyone using them that 1 week.
Yeah. So thank you, Lisa. All right, Sarah, what do you think?
Think it's about my time to shine and pop off camera. So lovely seeing you, Mark. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I will see you next week on another episode of The Lunchroom.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Without further ado, I just want to bring the party and bring Brandon Michael Nase into the lunchroom. Hi, Brandon.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So happy to have you. This is there's also a different sort of IG Live or webinar moment this evening, right? For Broadway for Racial Justice.
Oh, yeah. Yes, there is.
So you're really in a Zoom discussion series day today.
Yes, absolutely.
What's the event tonight?
We are doing an Instagram Live, and one of our board members, Alyssa LeClaire, will be talking about allyship.
Cool. And so people can just check out IG Live for that this evening.
It's going to be very good. Alyssa is amazing.
So Brandon, if you could just for our viewers, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Brandon Michael Nase. I take he, him, his pronouns. I am wearing an orange button-up shirt. I'm a black man. I have a black beard and goatee, and I'm wearing a gray beanie. There's nothing behind me, just a blank white wall. And I am zooming from Brooklyn, which is the traditional territory of the Lenape and the Canarsie people. And I listened yesterday to this really incredible podcast.
Wait, I said
yes. And I think it's called Indigenous Action. And it spoke to the very first episode is about land acknowledgement and about this quote unquote trend of land acknowledgement. And so I would encourage everyone to go and listen to this podcast because it is very insightful to hear what Indigenous people have to say about land acknowledgement. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Great plug. So Brandon, we have, so many exciting things to talk about today. And, we had Chanel De Silva on, a couple of weeks ago. Oh yes, great. And I said this thing with Chanel, and I think this is true for you and I as well, that our history isn't long, but it was quickly deepened.
It was indeed.
Yes. Of course, because we met each other on the Black Cloud when you joined that ensemble, and both those productions, both at the Loeb and then when we revived at Lincoln Center last summer. Well, I guess now 2 summers ago. Now the summer's officially over. But then you also joined for this quirky, wild experience. Extraordinary, which was about 2 years ago in November.
Yep.
Which was one of the weirdest and most fun experiences of a show at my time.
Truly. Well, also when we think about my 2 like theatrical ART experiences, like they were very like small, and maybe this is all theatrical experiences at ART, but you know, we were like, it was a very, very creative, ensemble-y creative process. Which for me, I was like, that I loved it.
Yeah. It was just because there was like no such thing as freezing that show. So I know even you would come in for a half hour and Diane would be like, so here's this like new paragraph I'd like you to read.
Also, because Patina was with us that first weekend, and I was all about introducing Patina because I was like fangirling, and then also like I had seen her at Bye Bye Baby one time, and so we had this whole like monologue planned, but also like I got it at half hour for the show. Like Dick Scan was like, "Here you go. We know that you can memorize it," and I'm just like in my dressing room at half hour trying to memorize the introduction for Patina Miller. What a wow.
I guess that's the burden of being a quick study, is once people know, you can never escape that secret.
Truly. Yes, and Diane literally would always be like, "Oh, Brandon can do it quickly." No.
Yeah, didn't you also like give a really amazing impassioned Giving Tuesday?
Yes. Yeah. That, wow. Love the AFC.
Always a wild time, right? That was a fun show though, because seeing so many people come from shows past and like just getting to hang out with y'all for those weeks, especially around the holidays. Oh, and you had a kid, you had a baby during that time.
Yeah. My son was born during that time. Wow.
I forgot about that. That was so wild. Didn't it happen maybe like an hour or 2 before curtain one night?
Yes. Well, no. I think it happened after a show, but it was always so interesting because we knew that we were going to have to change the script based on whenever Ellis was born, because it was like I just had a new baby, or I had a new baby last week or 2 weeks ago. Like we knew that it was going to have to change. Wow.
You know, the living theater. So for all you watching, Sarah just reminded us in the chat, if you've got questions, we are going to do our Q&A as normal. So just pop them in the Q&A box. If you pop them in the chat, I may not see them, but if you put them in the question and answer, I will definitely see them, and I'll get to as many as possible after we sort of wrap up the conversation today. But Brandon, I'm glad you joined us, and we could certainly spend the full hour just reminiscing about those 2 shows alone, let alone any other theatrical memories that either of us might be holding. But I really wanted to have you on in conversation today because of the organization that you started, Broadway for Racial Justice. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk with you about that and sort of share that with our ART family, of which you're a part, and I think which this organization is so important for the industry. So I want to make sure our audiences knew about it and heard about its creation. So I just wonder if you can start sort of by both giving us kind of the mission for Broadway for Racial Justice, and also talking to us about like I don't know if it was like a moment of clarity or just this place where you sort of visioned this organization and you saw sort of a path for what you wanted to create and how you wanted to start organizing.
So Broadway for Racial Justice, in short, the mission is fighting for racial justice and equity for Black, Indigenous people of color in the Broadway and theatrical community at large. That's our mission, which is a very wide scope of a mission, which was, kind of what I wanted. So for the entire time that I've been in this business, so I was an educator before. I got my undergrad in music education and then was a public school teacher for a few years before I moved to New York to go to grad school. But the summer in between my 2 years, I did my first professional show, which was Les Mis at the Dallas Theater Center. And Lisa Tommy was the director. And so I was like, I wasn't necessarily a young person, but I was young in the business. And so I was very much trying to, find my way, like not trying to shrink down and not take up space ultimately. And Liesl that was not anything she was going to have any part of. And so for me, being like a mentor, and that experience kind of just started to break down the walls for me of what I would say like my service to white supremacy in the business, and more so like in my life in general. And so from then, when I graduated from NYU, I let all of that go, that like not take up space idea, and was like fully like, no, if I see something that's not right, I'm going to speak to it. I will speak truth to power. I don't have a problem with that. And so there are so many things that we're doing with Broadway for Racial Justice that I, throughout my career, had spoken to. I remember always speaking about, like during Red Bucket, when they would collect, I always remember thinking like, when are they going to do this for like the Black community? Because also like a community that needs that sort of help. And there were those little things, and just the idea of like, there seems to be this gap between like the upper echelon in our industry and the people that are trying to come up and make it. And all of these things swirling around in my head. And I think I always knew that I wanted to create an organization, entity, whatever it may be, to try and address all of these issues. But I think I also, based on what white supremacy told me, like I needed to have a bigger platform to be able to do that. And I needed to have a lot more resources to be able to do that. So here we are in a pandemic, and Ahmaud Arbery had been murdered, and George Floyd had been murdered. And like so many, it wasn't necessary for me. It was kind of like, I don't understand why people right now are waking up to this, because this has been something that for the Black community, we have always been yelling and screaming and crying about this. But I think finally I was looking around and there wasn't like, Broadway wasn't doing anything. And it was in that time when people were starting to pipe up and say like, why aren't any of these shows saying anything? Why aren't any producers saying anything? Why aren't theaters releasing statements? And I looked around at other organizations that already existed, and as it pertains to a mission that was fighting for racial justice, discussing that topic, there wasn't anything. And so I was like, well, I'm just gonna do it. I have organizing experience, all of that kind of stuff. So it's like, I'm just going to do it. I know that I felt like I needed to wait for a platform, and then I'd had 2 conversations with 2 different friends. One was actually working at a theater, non-ec, middle of nowhere, and just was like experiencing microaggressions, especially during this time. And I had a discussion with him, and I was just like, you just need to tell them not to say these things in front of you. And he was like, oh, but I can't, I don't want. And I was like, no. You can, and you need to tell them to stop speaking this way around you, in front of you. And he was like, okay. And he did it. And he was like, wow, yeah, that. But to know that young Black people didn't feel empowered to like take up space and say, this is hurtful to me. You cannot speak this way in this space around me. to know that like they didn't feel that they could say that or had the resources to go to somebody to speak to about that. I was like, there needs to be like a hotline where like people of color can call and report these things to another person of color. Because for me, as a person who has worked in theatrical settings and experienced racism and gone through the channels that I was supposed to go through and called equity and was on the phone with a white person who didn't necessarily say it, but it was very understood that it was like, oh, I don't really see how this is racist. That was kind of what made, I was like, okay, let's just do it. Let's establish a hotline. Let's establish a financial assistance fund that is central to the BIPOC community. And so I did, reached out to friends. I like looked to my left and my right and was like, who can I like bring on board to help me do this? And that's how it started.
Well, and I have to imagine too, when you have all of these different layers of management, which are all sort of then steeped in white supremacy and feeding back the same line that you heard from equity, because like you have the union path, you have company management, you have stage management, and when you're grabbing on any of those and none of them are supporting any kind of
right. Oh, and I had grabbed onto all. And that's why there was a system that was set up, and I went through that system and had always gone through that system, and it never in my entire, whether I was a teacher or I was an actor, because I was called the N-word by another teacher. And in that same exact moment as an educator, I went through my principal, I went through my superintendent, I went to their principal, their superintendent, and it's always been the same of like, well, and even in that moment when I was called the N-word by somebody, it was still like,
yeah. Did you?
Right.
Yeah. One of the things I think to me that's like exciting and perhaps some people would say daunting, but about what you started is that it isn't just a Broadway or New York focused initiative, right? Like you are talking about the entire industry. So the regional theaters, the fringe companies and cities, the non-equity tours traveling the country. I mean, you are really opening that entire theatrical industrial complex.
Yeah, I think especially as it pertains to the union, like especially for non-equity, because if we're told go to the union, then I'm like, well, so then where are these non-equity people supposed to go when they're experiencing racism? And I think it's an understood, not stated, but understood thing that, well, you just have to deal with it and pay your dues. And I'm like, no, you don't have to just deal with racism. That's not how this works anymore, at least.
Right. So I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of specifically, because you all are kind of off of the bang. Like there are so many services. You're like, yes, tell my sleep schedule about it. But there are sort of already so many programs and services that you all put into place. And I would love to just get into a few of those, if you could sort of give us some background. The first one I was checking out was APOC, Amplifying People of Color, and was exciting to me because I think so much in the theatrical complex we're talking about like the ways people come in or out of theater, not necessarily as like theater artists, but as a different kind of artist in their own right, coming in and out of our industry, which feels like this program is really kind of aligned with that.
Yeah, so I'm very much I think it aids in me doing this kind of work, like aesthetic and like that kind of thing. And so I was like, okay, well, this idea of amplifying people of color, APOC as we call it, like it's not a difficult thing to utilize our platform to like amplify and lift up people that nobody knows. It's just not a popular thing. You want to like have people on your platform, on your Instagram page that like everybody knows, and then that draws. And so it was like, no, we should amplify the people of color in the business that don't have 15,000 followers and are, doing IG lives and getting paid to amplify like products, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what it was. We just like looked around and it was like, who are people who are doing incredible things? Ellis Dawson, who was on the Aladdin tours, standby, and is an unbelievable photographer. Like his photography is incredible. And I was like, people should know who he is. People, like, his name should be amplified, his work should be amplified, and he should get work because of that. And then other artists who, whether it be they do music or choreography, that's what it seems so simple to me. It was like, we have the platforms, so let's just do it. It's a matter of design, and it's a matter of getting information from people. And then we did a concert called Amplified that kind of stayed in that vein as well. You know, we had established artists on that roster for the concert. Jesse Mueller was in it, Shoshana Bean, but then a lot of the APOC artists were in it as well. So it's like, yeah, like how amazing that you can come to this concert and see Shoshana Bean slay, and then see this person that you probably don't know, but who's slaying and is just as talented as this person that you do know.
I think, you know, a lot of the conversation we're having in the industry right now also just circulates on like, what is the core of what we're doing anyway? Like, why are we doing theater? Which is this, like, I think a big question we have to interrogate. And to me, it always comes back to the storytelling, which gets to a much more interesting conversation when you're looking at artistry across a broad spectrum. Because it feels like there are all these ways in which we have like defined what a theater artist is, which are really just barriers to letting people in.
Yep. I mean, hello, I'm going to say it. Hello, Tony Awards. Like, are you kidding? Like, what? And that, the question that you said, like, why are we doing what we're doing? And last week was a dark week, especially that day.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like the nominations went out, and then I watched Kenneth Walker's interview on CBS Morning News. Kenneth Walker, who's Breonna Taylor's boyfriend. And it was his first interview. And I was just like, what are we doing? What are we actually doing? Why are we like, and for me, I was like, at the end of the day, for me as a theater artist, like, I just want to tell stories and for people to be moved and create change from telling that story.
Right.
I have been so conditioned though to want recognition for it. And so for me, it's like, I need to do whatever I need to do to break out of that conditioning. And if that means I'm in a Broadway show and I'm a lead and I need to say like, actually, I don't want to be considered for a Tony Award, like don't even, so that my motivation in my process is not that it is literally just, I'm telling a story and hope to create change by telling the story. But then I rant on that for
rant away. Well, especially I think there's a special, I don't even want to call it a burden. Maybe I'll call it an opportunity on performers in that storytelling that like the audience accesses you in this way. And so after the performance is over, there's still this like wanting to be connected to you and wanting to sort of like further a process, which is like a lot for performers to hold, right? But it's sort of wrapped up in that relationship in a certain way.
Right.
Okay. So, if there's like, I get on these little off ramps, I'm like, wait a minute, we have to make sure we get to everything on our time. So I also, this service I'm less familiar with, or a program I'm less familiar with in Broadway for Racial Justice is the Empowerment Summit. I wonder if you can talk to us about that.
So we held a forum a while back that was for the Black community. It was about unity in the Black community and the Black theater community. And what we like gleaned from that forum was that there was a need for like apprenticeship and mentorship. So we immediately were like, okay, well, let's assess and address that need. And it was like, we can have these forums, and then we can establish a mentorship program where people can apply to either be a mentor or a mentee. And Adam Heineman, who's on our board of directors, kind of challenged like, well, how are we thinking about mentorship and apprenticeship? And is it within the confines of what whiteness has told us this looks like, that there's somebody up here who like has all the answers and they tell this person down here, like, this is how you do it. And it was like, how do we like bring that together? And that it's like this kind of a relationship, a like decolonized way of doing mentorship and apprenticeship. And it ultimately was like, let's just hold space with each other. That was it. It was like, we don't need to like have this idea. It's like whoever wants to come and share, And something that Adam said a lot was like, you know, when we're holding these spaces together, everything we need is in the room. Everything we need to be able to access whatever it is, it's in the space. And so the Empowerment Summit is the second Saturday of every month. This month we had a panel that included Shawnice Alexander, Ari Groover, Eden Espinoza, and Karen Olivo. And it just so happened that like the only people that were in the space, and the Empowerment Summit is for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the only people that were in the space were female identifying, except for myself. And it wasn't supposed to be that way, but that's how it turned out. And I was just like, I can't put words to like what it felt like, the energy, and just like, but that everybody was there. And there was not this, I mean, we were with, Karen Olivo was in the room, a Tony Award winner and recent Tony nominee, and all of these different people with varied experiences, but that was not the thing. It was just like, actually, we're all just going to come into a space and speak from where we are and from who we are, and encourage each other, and lift each other up and listen to each other. Yeah, that's what the Empowerment Summit is. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, the undefinable spirit that is Ari Groover, I have to say.
Well,
I
adore Ari Groover.
Yeah, she was the associate choreographer on this musical we did called Burn All Night, and went in the show one night because someone didn't get back from New York in time. So she's like, I got it. I'm just going to go in and do the show. She was like, can I DJ the opening night party? I was like, of course you can. Like, what don't you do, Ari Groover? Please tell me. There's also the Fun Hotline, which you sort of referred to when you were talking about the sort of moment of conception for the organization.
Yeah, that was like the two
one of the first things, right?
Yeah, those are like the two pillars of the organization. This hotline that is fully operational right now that you can call, and ultimately it is just a moment for you to speak about a moment of racial trauma in a theatrical setting. And there is a advocacy rep that will take down your experience and then kind of, you know, be there to listen, not therapy in any way, shape, or form, but to give you the resources you might need for further help and aid. And then gives you the option of like, how would you like this to be addressed? Did you just want to call in so that you could like let this be noted for us to know about this theater so that we have it on record? Or would you like us to advocate for you and reach out to this theater? So that's the hotline and how it functions. And then the fund is an emergency assistance fund. You can go online and apply for like a micro grant, whether that's like, I need help to pay my cell phone bill this month, or I need help paying rent, or I need to buy groceries, whatever it may be. That service is there.
Yeah, great. And folks, you know, there'll be some information in the post show email too, as folks want to learn more or frankly make donations to support all the work that's happening. So for those of you watching, stay tuned for that, because it'll be after you leave the webinar and also in the post show email today. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I wanted to make sure we talked about the casting directive, because that is sort of one of the newer programs in the mix, I think, if I'm right.
Yeah, this summer we were hearing a lot about the casting profession and how wide it was and lack of representation. And I mean, for me as an actor, I'm like, well, yeah, I can count on one hand the amount of times I've gone into a room and seen a casting director of color. And so I started meeting and speaking with the BIPOC casting professionals in the field to kind of be like, what do we do? How do we address this? Like, is there a way to address this? And we came up with this training program so that over 9 weeks, we would take in people to learn everything about casting, take in Black, Indigenous, and people of color to learn how casting works, how Breakdown Express works, how the tools you need, all of these things, so that after taking this training program, they could literally go out and be like, I know what I'm doing, could be hired freelance assistants on projects. The main thing, though, for us was that there are these unpaid internships within casting. And they call it an unpaid internship, but it actually is like a pay-to-play moment, because if you're not getting paid, you have to be able to support yourself in some way. And most of the time that comes down to generational wealth, somebody being able to have their parents or somebody support them while they're working for no pay. And that is not something that is always readily accessible to people of color.
I mean, that's a problem for people trying to get a conservatory. That's a problem for people trying to get administrative jobs in regional theaters. I mean, that generational wealth piece is like huge across the industry.
I mean, that's right. It's an issue for anybody who wants to work in this field. I mean, actors, it's like, if you don't have that, it's just going to take you a really, really, really long time, because you're going to have to work 15 other jobs. Mm-hmm. And there's going to come a time where you're going to have to choose, like, do I go to this audition or do I pay my rent? And I venture to say it honestly doesn't need or have to be that way.
Yeah. I would agree. Not to take you off topic from the casting,
but
we important thing to underline.
Right. So we said, well, okay, if we're going to do this, we need to, like, first of all, speak to unpaid internships, pay to play, and that this is an attempt to rid the business of that. That they don't need to have all of these unpaid internships to be worthy enough or to know enough for you to actually pay them to do what they know how to do. And so then we're like, well, let's also flip it even further, and let's actually not just pay the people who are going to train these cohorts, but let's pay them to take this training. So that's what we are doing. It'll start in January. We'll announce we opened applications. Applications were only open for a week. And I kind of expected, like, we'd get like maybe 40 to 50, and we got 140 something applicants. Yeah, and we're only able this time around to take 10 people, because we want to be able to, we want it to be very concentrated, and we want to compensate them for their time. So yeah, we will announce the 10 cohorts November 1st.
Wow.
They will start training in January, and yeah,
that's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's very exciting.
I think I know you're exactly right too, because I go into a lot of audition rooms as a producer, and they're always very white. And if there are people of color in the room, it's usually the director or choreographer, if anyone. So those rooms are always incredibly white. And that's the meeting point, right? That's the first moment of the beginning of the relationship between a performer and a creative team in an institution.
And we really don't ever talk about, that is the moment for an actor that they're going to, like, try to get a job. That is the moment where it's like, you have to be the most vulnerable. You have to show everything about yourself. You have to do it really well. And so it is astonishing, not to me as a person of color, just because I know Black people and what is running through our DNA and the type of things we are capable and able to do in our creativity. But when you think about the fact that Black people enter into those spaces that are not safe and still somehow find a way to give what they give in that moment, it's incredibly remarkable. And then it begs the question, what if they were able to, like, go into that space safely, or into a safer space
with
full is, like, the possibilities, if we weren't also, when you think about that, we're, like, at the same time protecting ourselves emotionally, mentally, physically in that space, and then also, like, opening ourselves up to be vulnerable and take direction, and opening ourselves up to harm, because 9 times out of 10 there is harm done in those spaces based on the direction given to people of color.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the way that we have, like, set up the proposition of those rooms to begin with is, like, full of unnecessary tension from the jump.
Yep.
And then when you, like, layer an extreme amount of whiteness on top of that, it's, like, suffocating, I would imagine, right? To be a BIPOC person stepping into that room, like, okay, not only do I have to try to access this, like, emotional core,
yes,
but to do it in those conditions.
Yep.
And potentially 3 times in a day.
Right.
So, we've talked about a little bit where the education industry comes into this, right? And I think a lot about ART and being part of an educational institution, part of a university where we're, using theater as part of a more sort of robust education, like even using theater tactics and teaching theater to folks who might not be looking to go into it as a profession, but as a way to sort of unlock thinking or unlock creativity. I'm curious how you see the need for the movement for racial equity sort of extending into the training programs and educational institutions, many of which house theaters just like us, or are sort of like really the beginning, the training ground, where a lot of these like preconceived notions about the industry are embedded.
I think that personally, I think that there's this idea, and I've heard it said, that like, we need to address Broadway and then things will trickle down. And I can see maybe a little bit that thought process, maybe a little bit. But I always liken it to, and I guess this is just like a memory I have from when I was younger, of some friends of mine who were very wealthy and they had this huge, beautiful house, and they were like, our foundation is awful. And instead of buying a new house, they like were like, we're going to fix the foundation. They're like, our walls keep cracking, we patch them up, and then they crack again. So like, we're going to actually just like fix the foundation. It's going to be a lot of money. And I was like, how are they going to fix the foundation? Like, they have to lift the house up. And they're like, not necessarily, but yeah, pretty much. And they're like, it's a lot of money. People have to dig under the house and they have to patch and fix the foundation. And so in my mind, I'm like, that's what this is. Like, and the foundation is people coming into this business. Like, what did I learn in grad school about theater?
Right.
And I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about when you enter into a casting room. What actually has to happen is students have to be taught to enter into a casting room, to take up space and to know that they are just as in control as the people behind the table. That they're auditioning, and that also whoever it is that is giving you direction, they're auditioning for you. Because end of the day, if you get an offer, the ball's in your court and you actually make the decision. Mm-hmm. And so you get to say, yeah, I want to work with this person, or no, I don't. And when you're in that audition room, that is also the moment for you to figure out, like, do I want to move further with this project? If I get a callback, do I want to take the callback? And so I think about how many times I've been in an audition room, and after I've sung, there might have been from the director, do you have any questions? And it's like, no. And it's like, no, wait, yeah. Like, what actual questions do you have? Like, what's the rest of the creative team like? Are they all white like you? What is the theater that I'm going to work at like? Like, I'm like, we have to break down these barriers of the taboo of talking about these things. And I think that starts in education. But I also think that it starts in the way that people are being educated. Like, I have been doing like some workshops with university students, and it is, even whenever I say, okay, my question is, what is the beginnings of American theater? The keyword there is American theater. And they always give the right answer. They're like, it's like minstrelsy and vaudeville, and then it moved into, and I stopped and I'm like, so just stop and just think about the way that you said that. Mm-hmm. Minstrelsy and vaudeville. And I'm like, what is minstrelsy? And like, well, blackface. And I'm like, you've been conditioned to just fluff off the fact that the beginning of American theater, that this industry is literally built on racism. Mm-hmm. Foundation. That is where we're operating from still currently, because it hasn't been addressed. Mm-hmm. There's like no weight given to that in universities. There's no weight given to that, and it's not a through line of like, and what does this point back to, kids? Racism. And what does this point back to? Racism.
Well, and it's also like that sort of like idea of American culture, right? Which, like, when I think back to education, it's like really like the sort of Eurocentric white experience of that. Because if we're really going to talk about like American culture, that it is truly a pastiche conversation. That's not one thing. Not to say that, there's a certain tenor of white supremacy that has dominance and power and has visibility. But if you're really going to boil it down, that's like actually not the way culture is celebrated and shown within the country.
Right.
And that it comes like so much from the education, right? Like,
yes,
in reading the canon plays without juxtaposing that to any other kind of writing at the time.
Right. I mean, I feel like I could go on, and I'm rereading Austin Channing Brown's book, I'm Still Here. And it's very interesting because she works in churches. She's a Black woman. And so this book is just like about her experience working in those kinds of white spaces that which to me is interesting because it actually reminds me of, and is so parallel to me of, theatrical settings, because churches claim to be like, we love everyone. We are so like, and theater is the exact same thing. It's like, we are the most open, accepting. And I'm like, and we're just now like really talking about racism.
Right. In spaces that are supposed to be incredibly spiritual. So like the vulnerability should be available to everyone. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think that, but I think that it is, I think also when you like stop and fully break it down, it is so monumental and gigantic that I think that for most people it's terrifying and like overpowering when they like stop and start breaking stuff down, because I see it when I like speak in these workshops. I see the kids' faces and whenever you frame it in a different way, especially when you're talking to like predominantly white students and they are coming at it from this space of like I asked, like, has white supremacy affected you negatively? And like, oh no, I've just benefited from it. And I asked somebody that's gender nonconforming, I'm like, have you ever been misgendered? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, you realize that is all like patriarchy and the ways that whiteness has told us that the binary functions. Like, this is how it is. There is nothing else. And they're like, oh,
right.
You're right.
Well, because it like sets the tone for the thing that we're chasing, whatever that is. Right.
Right. And that's the other thing is like, what are these students in these theater programs stuff? Like, why are you entering into this business? What is your end goal? And for so many of them, it's like, well, excellence. Well, what is excellence? The top. And I'm like, well, what is the top? Tony Award. And I'm like, they're like, we're striving for this thing that ultimately exalts white supremacy. So,
yeah. It's like painful because you're like, you are you're watching folks set themselves up for so much disappointment. But how do you?
And teaching people teaching students not to just exist and take up spaces themselves, but to exist as somebody else completely. Like, down to the rep that you were given as a black musical theater actor. It's like, here's Make Them Hear You, here's Free at Last, here's this. And you hear these stories all the time that it's like, this is the music that you sing. You are black. When you graduate from this program, you audition for Dreamgirls, you audition for, you're going to be great in Hamilton.
Yeah.
I mean,
the songs that you sing to land those parts.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, it brings me to like a question for you as an artist is kind of, where do you find the power and the intersection of yourself, right? As an artist and as an organizer, how do you see those identities kind of show up in each element of that work, or do you even see them separately? Is it like those are just so intertwined for you now spiritually that it doesn't separate?
Yeah, I don't think that I see them separately, because I don't think that I think that's a privilege that people of color don't have ultimately. And I think that currently, as it stands, that the ability to separate those things is a privilege. And I think that it is a privilege that is used as a tool to uphold white supremacy. That you need to stay in football and keep your voice out of politics. You're a football player. This isn't your place. And it's like, But for me, I'm like, no. That is part of my activism. Is like everywhere that I am at, I'm speaking to this, and this is the standard, and this is what I am upholding the spaces that I am into. And up until now, it's been kind of like detrimental for me to my career, unless I'm working in a space that also seeks to do that, like ART. But if I'm not working in a space like that, which is the majority of commercial theater, cats, I know that I'm going to be viewed in a certain way when I say, like, I request that you all undergo racial bias training, and that the response is like, oh my gosh, how could you do this? We're not racist, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, that's fine. Like, say what you want to say, continue to exist in your white, but I'm going to speak on this. I'm going to speak about this because it's not acceptable. And I want to be able to do my work. I want to be able to create art. And I know that my fullest potential is unlocked when I'm in a space that I feel safest.
Well, and to your point earlier about the interviewing the institution, right, or interviewing the producer, like, where ultimately we should be shifting that lens entirely, where you're not writing to ask for everyone to undergo this training, but at the outset, we are presenting to you the sort of robust training that our community goes through routinely.
Right.
The way that training shows up with our staff, with our audience, with our artists, so that you don't have to ask that question, right?
Right.
Which I feel like is so much of what BFRJ is working towards, like really getting people to shift their lens.
And especially within where we are doing work with universities and speaking, a lot of like students in universities are at the Empowerment Summit and the engagement team and are like, oh, I didn't know that I could, or I feel like I can now because I'm not doing it alone. And I feel like I have something bigger to point to that's like, if you're coming for me and mine, you're coming for like us. Yeah.
We're coming up on our last 10 or so minutes. So I want to make sure we get to some questions from our audience. But, and I had mentioned that, the information about BFRJ is going to be in the post and stuff, but I just wonder if you want to give us a quick plug where people can follow for more updates, the website, where people can give, all of that.
So the website is www.bfrj.org. And you can follow us on Instagram. We are super transparent. We post a lot on our Instagram. We hold a lot of the entire month of October has been devoted to this like Q&A with BFRJ, where we talk about like where we come from, like racial justice. What is our view of that? Our view is transformative justice. That is where we operate from, as opposed to punitive justice or restorative justice. For us, it's transformative. Speaking to allyship, all of those things. If you follow us on Instagram and our website, all the information that you could want or need is there. And yes, bfrj.org/donate, I think, is how you get to the donation page, or you can just go to the website and toggle over to donate. And all of the funds that we are intaking go towards the BFRJ Fund, emergency assistance, go towards the casting directive, which we're still funding currently, and also go towards our operations. I think it's very interesting, and I wanted to speak to this really quickly, is that first of all, we've done a lot of research on POC-led nonprofits and their success and failure rate, and the fact that there's like redlining and philanthropic redlining in the nonprofit sector.
Mm-hmm.
And that, because I just want to know, for me as like the person leading this, like, what's it going to be like? What are the difficulties going to be? And I just find it so interesting that for us, when people are asked about donating, it's like, well, where's our money going to? And we have posted on our Instagram, like, broken it down. Like, this is where money goes. Still get the questions.
Right.
And then also, whenever we do something like the casting directive, people are like, oh, now this I can give money to. And I'm like, we also have a fund. And ultimately, anything we spend money on, our graphic designer is a woman of color. Mm-hmm. Hiring diversity equity training for our board of directors, which is a BIPOC board of directors. And we still were like, let's have some diversity inclusion training, which at the end of the day, as great as it was, the majority of it, we were like, yep, this is how we operate, but still did it from a Black person, from a Black man. And so it's like, we are very transparent about where our money's going. Our money goes into the Black theatrical community. And we have to have money to exist and to support the Black community. I think it kind of goes into a bit of like, well, how is this, or what is this? And a lot of white people asking, well, how does this really, or what is this really? And I think it's just the lack of trust because of white supremacy. And I think we just need to like call it that it's like a Black person in charge of something. Can I trust that the money's actually going to, and that was like stuff that was brought to me when we first started, things being said like, well, he might be like taking the money to pay for his child support. Those were things that were said to my face. And I'm like, this is where we are. So I just want to speak to that like the money that's given is to help with our absurd amount of programming initiatives.
I mean, we just spent 40 minutes sprinting through it. Where we could have spent 40 minutes on any one of those programs.
Right.
So the giving is really giving to the mission of this organization.
Yes.
It's large and ambitious and exciting.
Yes.
And just it's not about parsing out specifically, what's in it. It should always be in general operating.
Yes.
All right. So we have a question here from someone who does who's a trained actor who does some sort of like executive presence training. They're asking, do you see a larger application of how you're dealing with racism in the theater to other parts of society? I'm a trained actor in MFA from NYU and work with people on executive presence. I've been asked to work with people of color to help them have their voices take up space and speak up, but often they're running into deep institutional racism. Any thoughts about taking these ideas to other industries? I've done a lot of work in healthcare.
I think that I actually have thought about this so much because I think that I get bogged down because I always at the end of the day go back to the bigger picture. And so like I'm fighting these fights we are fighting these fights in the theater industry. And then but then I like watched the Kenneth Walker interview and I'm like, what are we doing? But also like, what am I doing? Like, why am I? And I just think that it's so big and monumental, the problem, that it is so large when we think about it and when we actually understand it, that it is going to take a me doing it in the theater industry and somebody else doing it in the healthcare industry and somebody else doing it. Especially for Black people who are just like pouring out and taking very little in. It is so much to expect us to do it all in every area. So I think for me personally, I'm like, I teeter-totter and I go back and forth, but at the end of the day, I'm like, I have to know that what I'm doing is going to not just be impacting the theater industry, that I know that when I do a workshop with theater students, that they are going to go home to wherever their home is. And these things are going to be in their head and they're going to call to question mom or dad or a racist Uncle Joe or grandma and grandpa. That in some way it's going to trickle outside of the theater industry. And then also larger scale is like the work that I choose to be a part of as it pertains to theater, i.e. the Black clown, to know that something like that is having a really wide reach as it pertains to outside of the theater industry. Does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah. I mean, it brings up for me, something I've been thinking about a lot. In particular, as I like listen to myself or my other white colleagues in the industry right now, who spend a lot of time being like, I want to, take the trainings, do the things. I want to like really focus on like being a good anti-racist theater practitioner. And I can't like escape this thought the disservice that white folks are doing to themselves to only pledge that anti-racism through their theater practice like this moment is calling for anti-racism in your life.
Oh my gosh. And I just did a training for a university with faculty and staff. And it was like, we'll do 2 hours in the fall and 2 hours in the spring. And the whole first hour is literally just, I was like, where are you in your own personal racial identity development? Have you as a white person accepted the fact that you're innately racist? Because like we honestly can't talk about you as a theater educator practicing anti-racism until you address this in yourself. Yes. Or your everyday, when you're walking down the street, when you're walking at night and you see a Black person walking towards you in a hood on and you get this uneasy feeling, like until you've addressed that and like clocked that for yourself, we like, it's a non-starter.
Well, and, I mean, this might be a naive thing to say, but I have this sense that it's actually easier to do it that way, right? Because if you just get at the core, like if you're treating it through your professional practice, through your social practice, whatever, it feels like you're like treating a lot of symptoms. Or is it you just like dealt with the thing that you have been like conditioned in, which is racism as a white person in particular? It would be, that would bear fruit in a way that would extend to your professional practice and your social practice.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. We have one more question here. This is kind of tapping back into our beginning conversation about performance. And this is kind of a fun one to end on. If you could go back in time to any theatrical performance, or let's just say like moment of art making, doesn't have to be in your lifetime, what would it be and why?
Does it have to be theatrical?
No, I don't think so. I'm taking some host privileges here.
Okay, so this is what I've always said. Anytime I'm listening to Ella Fitzgerald, I'm always like, what I wouldn't give to like, first of all, to know what Black people were going through in that time. And right. Then to know that all of these Black people like went into these spaces in the basements of these bars, like in the Village. And that like Ella Fitzgerald just like sang the way that she sang. And to also know that like to hear all of the different voices that have come after that are like, it's so obvious, like everybody wanted to sing like Ella. Everybody manipulates their voice to sing like Ella. And I just think about like, what must it have been like to like have dealt with everything that they dealt with during their day-to-day life. And then like, we're going here. And it was probably like, if I'm sure that like, there were so many secretive moments where it's like, we're meeting here in this space and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And to like sit with like a whiskey and listen to Ella Fitzgerald sing and just like what that must have felt like and been, and then to like look around and just see Black people everywhere in that space. I'm like, yeah, that's what I would want to go back to.
Yeah, but that's like a balm.
Yes, exactly.
Brandon, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
this
you
is like a long time in the making, so I'm so glad we got it to happen.
So like, I feel like we didn't talk about anything in depth, and
we're at
right, and here we are. It's 2 minutes left.
I know. I mean, I often like sit in some of these, and I keep thinking this should have been a happy hour program, not a lunch program, and it should have been 90 minutes, right?
Yes.
Get a little cocktail, another half hour.
Yes.
Who knows where we would have gone?
True.
Well, thanks again for being here. And please, everyone, check out in the brochure email all the information about how to stay in touch with Broadway for Racial Justice. It is just the beginning of what is going to be an incredible organization and a fierce power in our industry. I also just want to thank you for joining us today, watching again. We will be back live next week. I will not be with you next week, but my dear friends Sophie Ansaval and Emma Watt will be co-hosting a conversation with Justice Amir and Chrysanthemum Tran, two incredible poets and the minds behind Anthem, which is currently on demand in the Virtually Overrun series. So please go to our website and check it out. Cool. All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Absolutely. Thank you,
everyone. See you next week. Or I won't see you next week, but you'll see some people next week. All right.